A few weeks ago now, I mentioned in my brain rot video that I ordered some cerebrolysin as I wanted to use it to treat my own cognitive decline and also assess its utility for other needs. I have now completed a short cycle of it and want to share my experience with it. I won't go into detail about the compound as there are plenty of videos doing that. But essentially, cerebrolysin is a peptide mixture composed of neurotrophic growth factors derived from the brains of pigs. They're similar in protein structure to our own endogenous neurotrophins and growth factors that they activate the same receptors and pathways in the human brain, subsequently healing and regenerating the brain. Put simply, it's injectable pig brains. While it isn't FDA approved in Western countries for whatever reason, everywhere else in the world it's used to treat dementia, strokes, traumatic brain injuries, and other neurocognitive pathologies, and it has been in clinical practice for 50 years with extensive evidence of its safety and efficacy. If you have sustained a serious head injury or are suffering from dementia, they give you cerebrolysin. In biohacking and nootropic circles, it's often hailed as the holy grail of cognitive restoration and enhancement. So, given that with hikikomori and this lifestyle does come with a certain degree of cerebral atrophy and a general sense of getting dumber, cerebrolysin seems to be one of the better options we have currently to solve this problem. On the box, it says that it's used to treat mental retardation, which is quite relevant to our situation, gentlemen. Now the question is it worth using? Absolutely. It is by far the best substance I have used in my own endeavor of trying to cure my own brain rot, and even just for mental health purposes in general too. It is going to become a permanent part of my own protocol, but that is as long as I can reliably get it across Australian borders. Mind you, I have no experience injecting myself with substances at all, and I will share my experience learning and doing precisely that. On to my experience with cerebrolysin. It feels as if around 1 year, possibly 2, of neuronal atrophy has been reversed from just a handful of vials. Time moves slower now. My cognitive baseline is much higher and my brain no longer short circuits when exposed to novelty. I am more engaged with everything I do. I wake up earlier and with more life, and this energy also sustains itself throughout the day. I am calmer and I am in a better mood pretty much all the time. And this does seem to be a long-lasting change as it's been more than a week since my cycle. All my senses have been enhanced. I can listen to music in much higher fidelity. I can hear all the individual instruments and my appreciation for music has increased. I notice more details when watching things too. I can perceive all the in-between frames of animation when watching anime. When walking around outside, I can see much further and process a lot more information in my environment. My endurance has increased, both cognitively and physically. I can focus on tasks far longer. Before, I could only watch around 3 episodes of anime without English subtitles, as I am learning Japanese, before my concentration would give out and I could not pay attention anymore, signifying the need for a break. This is a non-existent issue now. This increased capacity also extends to doing vigorous physical exercise, as that does tax the central nervous system. Usually, after a long bike ride, I would be put out of commission for the rest of the day. Nothing taxes me now, and it's great. My neural connection with my limbs has improved, along with my coordination, and even my ambidexterity improved. I feel more embodied. There's no schism between my mind and body, and are now unified as one cohesive unit, as it should be. It was on the 3rd day when the benefits of cerebrolysin started to manifest. It became apparent that I was able to perform at a much higher level in various video games, and I have returned to the level I used to perform at a few years ago, of which my decline in this area has been a source of distress. I'm able to do more complex sequences of actions and much faster too. My processing speed, reaction time, and overall cognitive capacity has improved drastically. It has quite profound anxiolytic and antidepressant effects as well. No antidepressant or benzodiazepine can compare to the serenity that cerebrolysin grants. The specific point when I noticed the anxiolytic effects occurred on the 7th day when administering my 7th vial of cerebrolysin. Just to preface, I'm a bit of a hypochondriac, so the following situation would have triggered a mild anxiety fit. When pinning my 7th vial, I accidentally reused the needle that I used to draw up the cerebrolysin with to inject. Do not do this. Before, in a situation like this, I would be shitting myself, spiraling into a panic over the possibility that I gave myself an infection. I reminisce back to when I first started foraging for magic mushrooms and the panic attacks over possibly eating the wrong mushroom, running in and out of hospitals and getting blood test after blood test. I am a true hypochondriac. But what was striking, however, in this situation was that my reaction was ice cold and I approached it as a learning experience. There was no physiological panic nor any mental dread that I know my former self would have definitely experienced. What took its place was a purely logical deduction of the low chances of getting an infection, as everything is sterile, and, if the situation did arise, a rational plan of action. If it flares up tomorrow, I go to the hospital explaining that I reused a needle and that I may have an infection. I then get prescribed antibiotics and, given that I came early, most likely it will clear up in about a week, maybe in a few days. And that's it, no big deal. And this effect has seeped into other areas too. Small social situations, such as this whole YouTube thing, and the whole recent shout out from Osaka syndrome, thank you very much, and going out in public do not faze me at all. It's been superseded by a genuine feeling of securedness and a much stronger ability to rationalize things that would usually be a cause of anxiety. Now I feel like an explanation of this is necessary and informative. Why does increasing neuroplasticity and overall growth factors in the brain have an antidepressant and anxiolytic effect? Firstly, and I will be using traditional antidepressants as an example here to make a point, the entire therapeutic efficacy of antidepressant medication is mediated entirely by their ability to increase neuroplasticity and only secondarily by their ability to reduce depressive symptoms by serotonin modulation. At least in the short and medium term, serotonin receptor stimulation, in the case of SSRIs, upregulates neuroplastic and neurotrophic activity as serotonin governs most of the system. The reason that this results in relief from anxiety and depression when they do work is that with these two conditions, there's a general atrophy of the connections between brain regions, notably between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. Your prefrontal cortex is responsible for planning and reasoning, to simplify it, and it has dominion over most of the other brain regions, inhibiting them when necessary. With the amygdala, it is responsible for emotions, especially that of fear, again, to simplify it. In a healthy brain, the prefrontal cortex can adequately inhibit the amygdala to where the person isn't overwhelmed with fear and depression, and is more able to resist the effects of whatever environment they find themselves in. In the case of the sufferer who has been defeated, especially protracted defeat, the connections between these regions atrophy, leading to the symptoms of depression and anxiety. So, if you recall back to when I was rationalizing the odds of an infection, again, I have to stress that I am a hypochondriac, that was my prefrontal cortex inhibiting my amygdala in real time. And this improved ability then extends to all domains of your life, as your prefrontal cortex is constantly doing this, reducing anxiety and depressive behaviors. So when you increase overall neuroplasticity, and the best way to do this is done by directly increasing neurotrophic and growth factors in the brain, your brain becomes much more functional and interconnected. Disparate regions of the brain don't go haywire and destabilize everything. Another thing to note is that neurotrophins themselves also increase neurotransmitter levels as they proliferate the neurons responsible, such as dopaminergic neurons. Now, I'm not saying that depression is purely of biological origin and its symptomatology can be explained away by mere neurological malfunctioning and neurotransmitter imbalances. Obviously, we're in purgatory, gentlemen. This is self-evident. However, you can mitigate the psychological drag of it through strategic enhancement of neuroplasticity and end up as a consequence more resilient and able to handle life, as I have proven this hypothesis for myself. Continuing with my experience, there's a large increase in libido and overall dopaminergic drive, and this is where another one of cerebral license profound benefits manifested. There's a stronger primal drive to indulge in such things, while paradoxically, you're able to control yourself and not be overtaken by said drives. Everything has had its motivational salience increase, and the dopaminergic weight in regards to things have been recalibrated to be of equal weight of one another. I now have the ability to consciously choose between things and stick to a task and have it not be derailed by not so productive desires and behaviors. There's some very interesting implications here concerning its possible use in treating addiction, as this is indicative of a healthier dopamine system. And I shall give a brief explanation of the mechanism behind it, as there is a biological basis for this. This seems to be a consequence of a specific neurotrophin being elevated, namely GDNF, which cerebrolysine does contain. It primarily governs the proliferation and repair of dopaminergic neurons, and as such, increasing it results in the restoration of your dopamine pathway, returning it to a healthier, more optimal state. Reviewing the scientific literature on it, increasing this specific neurotrophin protects against addictive behaviors and reverses the deterioration of other dopamine circuits that is characteristic of addiction. So, if you're struggling with addiction of any kind or have general anhedonia, cerebrolysine has got you covered. Anyway, that concludes my experience with cerebrolysine. Now onto the topic of injecting. What is it like injecting peptides as a completely mind-eroded hikikomori with no experience of doing such things, since you do have to inject it deep intramuscularly? Surprisingly, it's not that bad and I actually kind of enjoy it. Do not fear the needle. The process itself is painless when done correctly, and by the third vial, given that you are taking one of the most potent neurogenic substances in modern medicine, you immediately acclimate and can just inject pig brains without issue, as it were indeed another day at your computer desk. There's only a tiny bit of pain during the initial puncturing of the skin that then dissipates a fraction of a second later. But the amount of pain you experience here would depend on the size of the needle, and I'm guessing a few needle gauges smaller than what I used would be completely painless. The only other source of pain is when you inject too fast, so you have to do it slowly. And that's about it in terms of pain. The location I chose to inject was the ventral gluteal muscle, essentially the side of your hip. This is the best location to do injections and is the preferred spot in a professional medical setting. But as I am not a medical professional, the learning process wasn't without its hiccups. Out of the 9 ampules of cerebrolysine I injected, I lost one. 5 went perfectly. Out of the 4 remaining, 2 were bad shots and the other 2 were minor mishaps. Ironically, my worst injection was my final vial. I pinned too far forward near my hip instead of where my glutes are. I jabbed the needle, instant horrendous pain. I pull it out and there's blood gushing out. I must have hit an artery or something that you're not supposed to stick a needle into. It healed the next day, so no real issue. The second bad shot was similar. I injected too far up this time and was met with a dull, radiating pain. This was probably a nerve. Again, healed the next day, no issue. In terms of needle specs, I used an 18 gauge needle to draw up the cerebrolysine and then swapped it out for a 1-inch 25 gauge needle for injecting. If you can, I recommend getting at least a 27 gauge needle, preferably a 30 gauge, as that will minimize the amount of tissue trauma and scar tissue buildup as the needle is much smaller. Out of maybe the 2 people who watched this video that do go out and try cerebrolysine, there are a few things that you should get right to maximize the value out of it. Ensure adequate nutrition. You want to be in a caloric surplus and get a lot of protein and carbohydrates. This is the minimum. To fulfill this, I supplemented with 2 protein shakes every day on top of my usual diet. After having done that, you then want to supply all the nutrients required for neurogenesis. The main nutrients of concern here are omega-3 fatty acids and choline. During my cycle, I tripled my omega-3 intake and doubled my choline intake, and this may be the key reason as to why I got a lot out of cerebrolysine despite using the lowest dose. I was taking upwards of 12 capsules per day of the highest strength fish oil, roughly averaging 4 grams of DHA and God knows how much EPA. I do think this is best practice when using potent neurogenics, otherwise you could be bottlenecking neural growth and miss out on gains that you could have gotten. So, what are my future prospects? I've sort of developed a taste for needles now. Nothing gets my neurons firing more than the smell of isopropyl alcohol on the side of needles. Given that I have now unlocked the injection route of administration, I want to push things further. My next goal is getting my hands on some growth hormone, maybe even testosterone, as I do not need my testicles. Combining either of the two, especially growth hormone, should potentiate the cerebral lysine and result in greater neuronal proliferation and cortical regeneration, as there are some anecdotal reports of precisely that and a biological basis as to why that is. I then also plan to stack this along psilocybin. Now that should result in some very interesting effects cognitively, and may even be approaching superhuman territory. Real NEET ascension perhaps? Maybe I'll finally be able to will my waifu into existence by mere thought alone. But that is a topic for another video. In the meantime though, I'll make more videos related to NEETdom. Now for my closing thoughts. As a fellow mind-rotted hikikomori, I recommend that you try cerebral lysine if you do feel that your cognitive decline impairs your quality of life. But that is if you're up for it, and are comfortable with the idea of injecting peptides into yourself without professional oversight. Even outside of its use for cognitive restoration, it's indispensable for depression, anxiety, addiction, and general life defeat. It is a tool that unequivocally works. And the fact that cerebral lysine exists, and possibly other neurogenics of its caliber, invalidates the entirety of modern psychiatry and psychotherapy, and also all the worthless and ineffective mental health solutions that our current culture propagates. This actually works, so long as you're willing to step outside the cultural paradigm and venture out and try alternative solutions. Anyway, I hope you find use in the knowledge presented here in this video, and that it also opens your mind to a different way of conceptualizing cognitive and mental health, and subsequently are aware of better solutions and ways to approach solving it for yourself. But again, not medical advice, as I am indeed just some shitter on the internet. It is quite boring around here. Comment your thoughts. Are you willing to inject pig brains? What do you think about this entire debacle? Would going full enhanced, becoming transhuman be a viable way to escape this nightmare? And is it ever truly over?